Okay, hello everyone. Welcome, welcome. I'm going to give us a couple more minutes and then we're going to get started. In the meantime, do not hesitate to say hello in the chat and where you're logging in from. Also, let me know if my sound is okay. Give me some feedback about the sound just to make sure we're good to go. Hello from London. Hello, hello. Hello from Hertfordshire. Hello from Spain. Oh, damn. Sound is good. Good. I'm glad. Hello, Essex. Hello, Portsmouth. Hello, Coventry. Hello, London. Ashford. Good, good. So many folks from so many different parts of the country. It's so nice to see. Hello to all of you. Okay, so let's get started, and I can let any other folks that might join a bit later in. I am welcome everyone. I'm Thanos Gostanis. I am the program director of the master's course in applied behavior analysis and positive behavior support at the Tizard Center at the University of Kent. For those of you that might not be familiar with this kind of event that we do on a monthly basis, this is our behavioral talk where we invite folks to talk about good practice in applied behavior analysis and positive behavior support or other branches of our science in a way to be able to kind of, disseminate good practice and share good practice with you all that, do great clinical work. So this event offers a complimentary CEU. Keep an eye out at 3 points during the session. I am going to interrupt our presenters just to deliver 3 keywords. At the end, you will be expected to click on a link that I'm going to put in the chat. And there, add your name as you want it on the certificate, your certification number, and the 3 keywords, and I will prepare a CEU certificate for you. If you want a CPD instead of a CEU, for example, for the UK Society for Behaviour Analysis, I can sort that out for you. It's not a problem. Just add that detail in the form and I'll make it work. So today we welcome Mari Cerda, Dr. Mari Cerda, Meg Solomon and Jen Farris, and they're going to talk to us about a book that they've written recently. Oh my, what a feeling, huh? Be able to say we wrote a book on this. We were discussing this when we were doing the IT check, and that you can go around and be like, I wrote the book on this, so don't you tell me what you. So there's that. I would be milking that cow if I were you. But jokes aside, thanks to all 3 of you for joining us today. If you could introduce yourselves and then take it away, I'll be hovering in the background supporting. And as I said, folks, keep an eye out for the links and for me delivering the keywords. All right, thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Thanos. That was a beautiful introduction. And yeah, we were recently talking about how we wrote the book. And I'm Meg Solomon. I'm really excited to share with you today what we wrote the book on. Mari, why don't you introduce yourself as well?
Oh,
before we get started.
Yeah, I definitely don't think that we have Thanos's mentality with the book. I think we're still in shock, and we're kind of like, did we really do this? Did we make this baby together? I'm in disbelief, and I'm more of, I don't know if you ladies are this way. I'm like, I hope you like it. So I'm Mari Cerda, and I am here in the Dust Bowl right now of Texas. We've been having 60 to 80 mile per hour winds the last couple of weeks. So I have a clinic here in Texas, and I also am a co-founder for a nonprofit, the LEAP Institute. And let's see, what else about me? I'm a former special education teacher. I've been in education and in this field for, gosh, I don't know, near 20 years. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Thanks. I'm Jen Farris. I am in Massachusetts, so New England, Northeast United States. I'm the owner and founder of Sprout ABA Services. We provide school, clinic, and home-based services. I'm also an adjunct faculty in the master's program at Elms College and just wrote a book, so can add that to the CV. And I'm also a precision teacher.
Amazing. And again, I said this earlier, but I'm Meg Solomon. I'm in Colorado Springs, Colorado, which I was telling Thanos earlier, we're right where the mountains start in the US. So for the most part, it's pretty flat, where Mari is, where it's that kind of Dust Bowl area. And then just past the Dust Bowl, you're going to run into the mountains, and that's where I am. But thanks for having us. We're very excited. I own and am the executive director of ABA across environments here. I post quite often, although I will say that while writing the book and doing these types of events, I've slowed down somewhat on Instagram, and my handle is @acrossenvironments. I believe strongly in providing compassionate care. That's always going to be my soapbox. And I'm also an adjunct professor for the master's program at Elms College, thanks to Miss Farris here. And then in the fall, we'll be with Western Georgia University here also in the States. So it's very exciting stuff that I think the three of us are going to be sharing today. And I will share how this got started very briefly. And it really started with just conversations with each other that we were having over time. And I introduced Mari and Jen to each other a couple of years ago because it just seemed like the right fit, and they complement each other very well. And I feel like the three of us together with this book, while this is a passion project and we spent quite a bit of time on it, there were many times where one of us would say, I don't have capacity right now. And then our teammates would step up and say, I do. I have the capacity right now. Let me take the lead on this one, right? And that's how this book was written. It didn't follow like a typical formula. It followed a natural flow. And that's really also the intention for this book. So if you notice, the word frame is in there, and reframe, because we will be talking a little bit about relational frame theory within the book and how contexts matter. But we'll also be talking about how this is a framework. It's not a strict curriculum or formula to necessarily follow. It's one of those things of, okay, I need to make this choice. Now what do I need to reassess or reevaluate to then move forward with whatever other choice I need to make? Does that make sense? So that's our hope with what we're delivering here today, and with what we're delivering in the book. We'll share, I think, more of the details of the book, like when it's going to be released and all of that good stuff, I think, at the end. Does that sound right, ladies? Beautiful. Okay, cool. So that is what our hope is with starting. So yeah, it's this framework, and it's designed to provide professionals like ourselves, behavior analysts, educators, those who work with populations who might be of a more in need of behavioral change services. It's such a broad market when you really think about this, right? And so that's also one of the reasons why we wanted to make sure that what we were providing were these tools of how Mari, Jen, and I run our agencies in 3 very different parts of the US. And when we think about what we're looking at nationally with problem behaviors on the rise, essentially, when we're looking at post-traumatic stress disorder on the rise, when we're looking at children who are in neglected homes on the rise, child abuse on the rise, and all of these things seem to always lead to one thing, and that's a behavioral disorder, as we call it in the US, or behavioral challenges, or whatever it might be, right? So our hope is to provide this framework of providing this difficult and delicate situation and different audience with pieces of how to practice person-centered care, so that we start with ourselves and then we move outward into the environment around us, so that we're not taking along this type of potential harm that we all carry with us from our learning histories. Okay, beautiful. We really did try to make sure everything as well was very much in line with applied behavior analysis, although we very much provide resources as well as tools that are provided from different fields of study, because it's important that within our science and within our application that we don't dismiss what's also happening in other fields of study that are relevant to what we're doing, such as childhood development, neuroscience, education, psychology in general. So it's, and trauma, of course, because I feel like that's really what's happening quite often, is this kind of collective trauma that we're neglecting to address. So with our book, we wanted to make sure that what we were doing made sense. So REFRAME was very meaningful to us. What we wanted to do was provide something that was responsive, so not just reactive, because many of us, when we are faced with these type of distressing situations, will begin to react as opposed to actively responding, which is often slower than we want it to be. And the process to get there can be even more excruciatingly slow. So please keep that in mind as you're going through this book and you're like, oh man, this is kind of heavy. It's supposed to be. What the field of psychology would call shadow work, we're giving a little taste of what that looks like. And Mari's going to get more into detail with that, but it is heavy. It's supposed to be heavy. It's dark. Let's get into it, right? But that's how we make sure that what we're doing is assessing, so that when we bring ourselves to this environment, we have taken into account all of the potential harm that we might be bringing there. We wanted to make sure that this was engaging. We provide a lot of case studies and case scenarios in hopes of outlining what this can look like in different applications from different people's perspectives. But we also looked at this as our curriculum that we're presenting as instructors should be engaging. It should be one of those things that wherever we're working or whomever we're working with should feel ready to be with that material and in that environment, so that we're enriching that space in an engaging and I'm about to say meaningful, but that's going to jump ahead, but in a meaningful way. One of my biggest and strongest values and things that I love to do as far as how I practice is with acceptance and commitment therapy. And one of its tenets is psychological flexibility. So flexible is one of the things we also wanted to make sure that we were presenting. So different options, different choices, because a lot of what we're doing with these students and with these learners and with these families should be flexible and ready to adapt to whatever context they're going through. I always like to think about this one. In fact, I thought about this earlier. How many of you have conversations both via text, in person, and via social media, all possibly at the same time? Jen, you better raise your hand. I do this all the time. It's a different context. It's a different space. So what we're doing has to also be equally flexible to meet our learners and their families and our students in those contexts where they are currently. And then we wanted to be as radical as possible. This was one of Skinner's biggest things for us. He wanted us to be so radical with how we approached behavior that we did consider what was happening inside, because humans are a whole being outside of what we can just see. We know that because we're pretty complex creatures. So we also wanted to make sure that what we were doing was promoting assent-based practices. Not only is that ethical and current best practices, it's what we should be doing all the time. When we are pushing for that compliance-driven, coercion-based practice, we are removing the autonomy from the learner. We're telling them that their voice doesn't matter. I don't care what you want to do. My way or the highway. That's not good ABA. That's not radical ABA. That's not what Skinner wanted. And as we point out in the book, we're able to talk about this with apex predators, where we can practice assent-based practices with them, and yet we are afraid to practice the same way with human beings. And there's a problem there. So we have to figure out what to do. And our hope is that the book provides that little bit of a formula for you as well. And again, I said this earlier, but we wanted to make this meaningful. We wanted to show how meaningful stimuli and meaningful curriculum can be empowering for students, but we also wanted to make the book meaningful to whoever's reading it so that they're engaging with the case studies. They're engaging with like, oh man, that's the connection that I needed from grad school to practice. That's the connection that was missing between this article that I read and what we can do. And then, of course, it's a teaching tool. Our hope is that this is an education for others so that we're continuing to disseminate our science in a way that's proactive and productive and really beautiful, in my opinion. All right. We're excited to share some more. Jen's going to get into now what's more inside of the book.
Awesome. Thank you. So throughout the book, we outline lots of different things. We start by setting some intentions, engaging in some and promoting the reader to engage in some self-reflective exercises. I think we truly believe that you can't move forward without acknowledging our history, right? And as practitioners in behavioral science, our history is rich. It's rich of really great things, and it's rich of some things that we might like to let go along the way. And when we can sit and reflect and kind of lean into that, it allows us to recenter our values and decide that, like, do we want to do tomorrow what we did today? Do we want to do today what we did yesterday? Do we want to do 10 minutes from now what we did 10 minutes ago? And so that's really where we start. And then we lean into inner behavior change. That's where change happens first. So when we say inner behavior, we're talking about private events. Same thing, different terminology. Then we're going to get into the current dimensions. So we're not the first people that did that, right? Beowulf and Risley started that out a long time ago. And we talk about how those dimensions exist now, right? What it looks like today in ABA practice. And also, what does it look like in a person-centered, compassionate care, trauma-informed, right? Insert hyphenated ABA versions here, right? What does it look like when we're using the 7 dimensions today in our practice? And I think I speak for all of us when I say that's not the same way as we did 10 years ago. We've been practitioners for quite some time. I'll leave out the number of decades that I've been practicing in the field. For sake of my own embarrassment, but there's a lot of things that happened within those times. And, we all, and as graduate students, if you guys are graduate students and anyone who's been a graduate student of ABA or student of behavioral science has read this article, right? And somehow we're still reading the same article, which is lovely. But by extension, I think one of the things we would ask is like, are those still our 7 current dimensions? Of course, they're the ones that root our science. But I think, one of the things that, and there's some research out there about this as well. I won't get into my nerdy citations, but is compassion the seventh, the new dimension of behavior analysis, right? What are the eighth dimension? I'm getting them all wrong, but what does that look like today for a practitioner? We're going to visit the past, and we're going to talk about how much of what we're talking about has lived in our history all along. Skinner was talking about being radical and being free of coercion in the 50s. So a lot of what we're suggesting is not new and is really rooted in practice. What we really tried to do, and I think we successfully did, was bring together the ways that we practice. So as a precision teacher, I'm the self-proclaimed data nerd of the group, right? And we each kind of bring our speciality to it. And so part of that was looking at, data, which we do in chapter 10, but also visiting the history of data and how we veered from what Skinnerian measurement was intended to be, right? And how to really kind of root in our history, but also in what we would still consider to be the best ways to do those things. We look at pulling it together for our learners. Certainly here in the US, we're operating under a medical model. So we're writing treatment plans all the time. It's actually exhausting, to be honest, and a bit convoluted, but that's a story for a different time. But so how do we bring it together to write goals and objectives that are meaningful? How do we build the contingencies? How do we do that? How do we do that for learners who engage in escalated behavior, complex behaviors, and really looking at a constructivist approach that really brings in all of the different areas of life and learning history. Looking at developmental milestones, which is crucial. A lot of us have not been trained in those, but it's important to know what is considered to be age normative as we're building skills. Selecting the right assessment tools. There's so many out there. And I don't know if you guys see this where you're practicing, but one of the things we see here is someone says, oh yeah, here we use insert assessment tool here, right? And what we're saying is, we don't want to pigeonhole in using one particular assessment. So we're going to tell you about a lot of different ones, some which you might have heard of, some which you might not have heard of. Some of them I hadn't heard of, and my colleagues brought those to my attention and kind of outlined for you how to select the right assessment tool. Often we're using the wrong assessment tools or not the best one for what we're looking at. We're evaluating academic type curricula with ABA assessments that measure early learning milestones. So just really outlining how you can select the assessment tool that is really going to get you started on where you need to go in the most effective way. Also, regulation during escalation. This is a big part of what we do. We'll highlight some of skill-based treatment and other areas of providing compassionate care. We get into what does it mean to provide assent-based care. How do you do that? How do you build the boundaries? All of those kinds of things. Data. We're going to outline measurement practice. Going to teach you how to chart a little bit because we couldn't not do that. But also just talk about what is best practice in measurement, things to consider when you're selecting a way to measure what you're looking to measure, and skill development and interventions. How do you decide what to do and how you're going to teach it? So here we dive into what in precision teaching instructional design we call a component composite analysis or an element compound analysis, depending on who your mentor is. Shout out to Dr. Rick Cabina. And, how do you look at skills and what skills make up other kind of bigger, larger skills and scale back to really know where to start with your instruction and then outlining those scope and sequences. And then we're going to bring it all together and say, okay, we just put all this stuff out there for you. How can you start doing one thing today? And one of the big goals we had wasn't that, sure, we would love for you to sit down and read the book cover to cover. It's just shy of 300 pages. So, maybe block out a day to do that. But also our goal is that you tab it and you put it on your shelf and you pull it back out at another time when you're like, oh, I remember reading about, this intervention or that intervention, and now I want to hop in and go in and do that.
Before you proceed, let me stop you there so I can deliver the first keyword. Okay, folks, for those of you who are collecting CEUs, our first keyword is penguin. Our first keyword is penguin, okay, as in the animal in the previous slide. All right, thank you very much.
Okay, so our goal here is to help, Meg talked about ACT, and really, I think that comes into play in a lot of different areas. One of the things I think about when I'm thinking about REFRAME ABA is, we have these relational frames in our brain and they exist within context, right? But they also exist by what we remember and know about the things that exist within the frame. And I think part of this is about reframing what people believe ABA is, right? And so again, when we look at our history, there's some things that are less desirable about that, and ways that people have been harmed by science that was probably implemented in a way that would not be something that Skinner would give his seal of approval on. But also, we all, I shouldn't say we all, right? Shouldn't speak in absolutes, but many of us as behavior analysts, we have analyst in our job title for a reason. If you're not part type A, then you might be in the wrong field, right? We veer towards this kind of logical, analytic way of doing things, which is great. That's why we're good at our jobs. But it's also what has made our science a little bit rigid over time. And so part of this, the goal is shifting from rigidity into flexibility and really helping teach practitioners or implementers of behavior science how to become more flexible in the way that they're implementing program while not losing the scientific nature of what we're doing. Personally, I was taught that once you place a demand, you don't back out of it. Well, I don't do that anymore. And I'm not saying that there's not a time or place for that. I think for some, maybe there are. For me in my career, there isn't at this point. But knowing I became comfortable being able to do that when I was able to know what to do. Mari, I think I hijacked your slide, so I'm turning it back over to you.
Did you? I thought we said slide 6, but I don't know. Who knows? So much has happened in the last 24 hours. No, I thank you, Jen. Everything that you touched on is so critical. And I think it's important to also acknowledge that as we are encouraging and pushing learners that we work with, or any individual that we're working with, to develop their own psychological flexibility, it's a little bit hypocritical to have that expectation if we are not also practicing that as professionals. So I think that's the important piece that we really try to hone in on in the book, is these initial activities of self-engagement and shadow work are absolutely critical and the foundation to being able to practice and start to develop this kind of skill repertoire of psychological flexibility. Because when you're able to have psychological flexibility, it also empowers you to be able to use critical thinking. And I think that's something that the three of us have ranted long and hard about, that we have so many professionals, and I don't want to like pin it on a certain series of like coursework or education, but it just seems like we have so many professionals that come out with this very kind of cookie cutter mentality of, I do it this way, it's ABC, And there is no room for professional critical thinking that allows you to have and demonstrate psychological flexibility. You know, you're working with another human being. And at the end of the day, we can spout off so much science and research, but really at the end of the day, the only person I can control is myself. And I'm still working on that as a human. So, you know, if we don't want to veer into that, you know, kind of ethical and moral borderlands of shifting to manipulating environments and creating reinforcing environments to manipulating a person, it's so critical that this first part of the book where we set the intention and provide these really heavy activities that I definitely would encourage you to take slowly, because, you know, it's kind of like cleaning a room. You want to rearrange, clean, organize, but in the middle of doing it, it's a mess. It's a hot mess. And, you know, you kind of just want to leave the space for a minute because it's so overwhelming. This work might be that for some people. I know it was for me. And that first part of the book is not a one and done. This is something that is lifelong. Shadow work is always something we should be working towards, because every individual that we come into contact with has a unique learning history. They have just unique intersections and individual cultures that are influenced by all of these intersections. So I think it's just really important that, you know, readers understand why we weigh so heavily on this first part and the piece of psychological flexibility. So, okay, I'm good to go. All right, so I think we're definitely speaking for kind of Western US society norms when we share this slide with you. It's really safe to say that where we are with majority culture, we're not a very child-friendly or child-centered society, just to begin with, you know, and ABA is simply that microcosm of and a reflection of our society. And so I think we see that across many disciplines, education, you know, our own field, where we are in such a rush to get children to grow up and to learn skills, even when it's not developmentally expected or even safe. But we have a history of, in our field in particular, of, like Jen was saying, when you place a demand, like, you have to follow through. Like, it's your way or the highway. If I give in any sort of way, then I'm demonstrating, you know, weakness, or, you know, I'm going to reinforce a behavior that I don't want to see repeated, when really we're taking and stripping away the core humanity of ourselves and of what should be embedded and enmeshed within the field. And it's such an empowering thing to be able to say, like, oh, I don't like that rule, and I don't know who said we had to follow it, but you know what? I'm not following that anymore. In any relationship, right? We also touch on this, that we have got to move away from transactional reinforcement and relationships. It can be so transactional with, here's a sliver of a Skittle, or, you know, here's a gummy for doing your task. And if we take that out of that context and put it into any other relationship that we as humans experience, that transactional relationship is so unfulfilling. If I was in a relationship with my partner and he was like, great job doing this, this, and this, here's the credit card, and then goes away and doesn't give me any quality time, doesn't, you know, have this authentic rapport with me, yeah, okay, sure, the credit card's nice, and it's a general reinforcer to a lot of other things I might want that are reinforcing. But at the end of the day, I am a social creature. We all are. And I need that connection. I need that authentic relational reinforcement and not transactional. And so when we live in kind of this binary of, like, you do A, I give you B, or, you know, you do this and I do that for you, and it's so transactional, we cannot build an authentic rapport with learners, which is going to become that foundation for when we have to compassionately push for challenging skills to be learned. There's no trust there. And so I think it's important that we work towards reframing our idea about what do I expect from this learner, this child, and is this a reciprocal therapeutic relationship? In other words, is it a give and a take? If you've ever gone to therapy, like you personally, would you be okay with your therapist demonstrating these behaviors towards you? You have no say. You have no, voice or the scary word. You have no choice in that therapeutic relationship. I don't know that I would continue attending or seeing that therapist, because it's so critical that I know that I have a voice in this therapeutic relationship. And even though they're the professional and they're guiding me, I have a say in, this is not comfortable for me right now. I'm not ready to touch on this. And them being able to have psychological flexibility to say, okay, let's work around it. Let's work towards something else to help you be ready for maybe opening a historical wound or an attachment trauma that you've just buried for so long. And I think it's so important that we recognize that our field is supposed to do the same. It's okay for a learner to want to escape the work. Our goal should be teaching them how to safely escape and request those escapes. Anywhere I go in public, first thing I do is I look for where are the escape routes. Sadly, right, living in America, where can I escape? And I think that is something that learners should have the opportunity to identify and know how can I escape? These distressed and challenging behaviors aren't the safe way to do that. So my first job as a behavior analyst is to teach them how to easily and safely escape from something. That's where trust is built, because then with that authentic reinforcement and relationship, there are times when I might have to say, hey, the escape option isn't available at this moment. You're safe. Let's try. I also think, and we also understand that, children with disabilities have a much higher statistical chance of being abducted or abused. And if we don't teach children how to non-comply, and instead we are teaching them through our sessions and our interventions that essentially every adult that you come in contact with, you must comply with. We are putting them potentially in dangerous situations outside of the context of a therapy setting or a school setting, because if they're at the park and they have this ingrained in them that every single adult I must comply with, that person coming down the street in the white van full of stuffed animals and puppies, and they open the sliding door and say, hey, look at what I've got, come in and see it. A child has no safety skills to say, you are not a safe person. I don't know you. You're a stranger. I'm going to non-comply. So escape, non-compliance, and assent are such critical skills. And I think it's something that we want to, again, reframe. And Jen talked about there are times, right, where we don't call it a demand, but a boundary of safety. There are boundaries that we will put in place. If a child is in immediate danger or is going to put themselves or others in immediate danger, a boundary of safety is much different from holding a demand for compliance. And I think that's it's kind of like gentle parenting. A lot of people think like, oh, you just give the kid whatever they want. No, there are still boundaries of safety, but it's a much more reciprocal relationship. And so that leads into responsive. Being responsive, again, like Meg mentioned earlier, means that we are able to successfully block or even pause ourselves when that back brain kicks into gear. And that back brain is that primal fight or flight or fawn or freeze response. We've all experienced it. And if we don't know the self, our self, well enough to know what our own triggers are, if we haven't done those self-reflective activities, we haven't unpacked who we are beyond just a therapist, beyond the initials, right? Beyond that BCBA, beyond that PhD, who we are as people, and be very aware of the baggage that we're carrying in our own backpacks, it is so much more difficult to step forward in a responsive manner, especially if we're looking at it from the lens of cultural safety. We are increasingly working with diverse families, and every family also has different intersections within that very same family. An individual's culture, shaped by their community, can also be influenced by personal intersections, right? We have socioeconomic status, we have gender, LGBTQ plus intersections, BIPOC intersections. You have a community culture, but then the individual is also shaped by their own personal intersections that create their own unique culture. And so if we aren't actively aware of our own culture, our own biases, our own learning histories that influence the way that we interact, the way that we write plans, interventions, the way that we write about our learners, we risk violating cultural safety for that individual and their family and their greater community. And so it's really important that we are aware of our own biases at every moment of the day. And that's why I said it's not a one and done. You're actively doing this shadow work and self-reflection. As a field, I've kind of noticed over the last 20 years, we're really bad about acknowledging ourselves as the primary stimuli in a learner's environment, who can absolutely wreak havoc or bring, peace and engagement and positive reinforcement to that space. And I think sometimes we forget we're that really important variable, and we don't do a lot of practicing of self-reflection. And the beautiful thing about any relationship, whether it's this therapeutic rapport, whether it's a relationship you have outside with, personal ones, what ends up happening is each person in that relationship becomes a mirror and reflects back to us those things that we need to work on. And if we're not willing to look in that mirror and instead try to project back, right, through reactive responses, we're not going to get anywhere. And our day is going to be filled with a lot of obstacles and barriers to successful interactions, sessions, teaching opportunities with these learners. So to be able to notice antecedents to our own behaviors, triggers to our own reactive responses, and that internal environment. Emotions are internal behaviors. It is a learning history that many times we don't even know where the root of it is, why it just emerges, but it's a real quick catalyst to a reactive response. And it's really difficult, if not impossible, to practice from a place of empathy and compassion for that learner in the moment when we are so triggered and in that back brain, right? The rest of the brain, the frontal cortex, all of these pieces go dormant because that primal part of the brain is like, oh my gosh, you're in danger. This is what we're going to do. And it hijacks everything. And so when we're not aware of these triggers within ourselves, that part of the brain is always going to take over, and it's just not going to be a positive outcome for anyone. Is this one still mine? Or who's?
This is mine.
Okay.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Can't count.
Thank you. So E for engaging. So this is an interesting
Jen,
one because
before you delve in, let me deliver the second keyword.
Go for it.
The second keyword is blue, as in the color. The second keyword is blue, as in the color. Thank you.
You got it. Okay, so as adults, we like to really define what engagement looks like. And it's really rooted in a lot of shoulds, right? The learner should, and I do this as a parent too. My child should be doing this or should be doing that, or this is what it means to participate in this event versus not participate in this event. And so one of the things we really look to do is highlight some of the research that's already out there. Dr. Greg Hanley has done a bunch of work on this. Some other folks over there at FTF, Dr. Holly Gover, who is one of my favorite researchers. If you're not following her work, I would highly suggest that you do. Also, Dr. Dittu Rajaraman, doing a lot of work in this area, the Staubitzes out of University of Vanderbilt, and really defining what does engagement look like. They extend that into, that happy, relax, and engage paradigm, how you define what happy looks like, how you define relax. And we dive into that as well and say there's kind of more to it than just happiness. There's more to it than just being relaxed, and there's more to it than just being engaged. But being able to look and define that for your learner based off of the context and feedback and kind of a bi-directional interaction that you're having moment to moment within whatever you're doing. It's important that we're keeping our instruction engaging. A lot of times work is boring and people introduce work that is boring and then they can't understand why the kid's not doing it. And it's like, they'd rather watch paint dry. Like, this is awful. And so ways that you can make instruction more fun, following their lead, both in terms of what they're interested in and in terms of the data output, when they're showing you that they're mastering things, making sure that you're continuing to go. So we look into both of those things, and certainly extensions of HRE is a big one. And so this is an awesome visual. I'm pretty sure that this is Mari's. She's our visual queen here. And it really looks like, okay, this is what the learner's behavior does. This is what the adult's behavior or implementer's behavior, can and maybe should look like. One of the things that I'm willing to bet that some of you guys share this sentiment, but certainly I notice this with our techs. Everyone just wants to do the right thing, right? But they also very specifically want you to tell them what that right thing is. And what we're trying to say is, like, we need some problem solving skills here to be able to identify it. But we certainly use visuals like this to be able to outline, this is what the right thing is. When we say honor scent withdrawal, they're like, well, how do I know what a scent withdrawal is? We're like, okay, well, let's define that for you. How do I know if it's a time that a boundary is in place and that's not available? Well, let us define that for you. And really outlining some plans that put all of those pieces together that allow the learner to continue to stay engaged, for us to be able to assess their engagement and also know when it's time to pause or pivot. In my center, we say go low and slow, low demand, slow progression, based off of those indicators, and constantly evaluating what that engagement looks like.
So we've talked quite a bit about flexibility already, but ACT is one of my favorite things. So we're going to get a little bit deeper into what this flexibility means. So at the center of this, right, there's this thing that happens, and that's that inner behavior. It's the conflict. It's the something that we all feel. And I say we all, again, it's not an absolute. Most of us, I would say. So each of us carry around this kind of thought or these kinds of thoughts throughout our day and as our contexts shift, right? So what our hope is to really go deep into this so that you can see, and we can all see as practitioners, that when we make the choice to remain in the present moment, which is simply just engaging our thoughts, our minds, to what is in our environment presently. So the way that we can do this with some of our learners is by playing a simple game of I Spy. This is another way that we can just do it with ourselves too. It's just naming things that you can see, tacting things that you can hear or taste, All of these things that we can use with our five senses are ways that we can engage in the present moment to help align our thoughts with what is happening in the real world in real time, as opposed to engaging in what might be more of an avoidant behavior. This is where our values come in. When we know truly what we value, what gets us up in the morning, what keeps us awake during the day, that's when we're able to do this kind of challenging work. Because while Amadi was talking about this so beautifully earlier about this transactional relationship, values help instead for us to really develop this therapeutic relationship. Because instead of providing this deliverable, what we're doing is building upon this intrinsic motivation. So it's still this MO, this motivating operation that we're all very familiar with within the science of applied behavior analysis, right? So we understand that there's this underlying motivation that keeps behavior going. Well, that's where our values come in. So it's not necessarily something that's deliverable, but it's something that is actionable. It's a verbal behavior that then matches this committed action, which is the behavior that matches the value, right? So we're building upon this framework within psychological flexibility. We can start there often with, what do I value? And then what are the behaviors that I'm currently engaging in to get us there? Beautiful. And then that's when I can reflect upon what we were talking about earlier, ourselves and what we're bringing to the table, what our histories are bringing. And that's that self as context piece, so that you're taking the perspective of yourself through over time, but you're also taking the perspective of the possibility that maybe you're projecting a little bit. Maybe you're putting some onus on somebody where the onus should really be on you. Does that make sense? That's where that self piece comes into play, is really with that perspective taking. And then accepting when, like, oh crap, maybe I did need to take responsibility for that. Or maybe this is a really crappy situation. By the way, I'm really proud of us. We haven't cursed once. So Thanos, thank you. You must be good stimulus control for us. But I'm in this really crappy, challenging situation, but there's really nothing I can do to control it. And so I do have to learn to accept it. Accept it. Oof. This is a lot of times when we start this with our learners, we, from a skills-based treatment perspective, this is where we teach that tolerance response, right? That, oh, okay, Knuckles, gotcha. I understand that this is something that I'm going to have to do, right? Before we move into the action item, right? Or how we're going to move forward. But sometimes there's still a little stickiness. That's where diffusion comes in, this cognitive diffusion, because really that just loosens it up, right? Makes everything find the separation between the sticky situation or those sticky thoughts and those feelings and that challenge, and moves us forward. So I think this all really kind of ties in to our good old friend, Mr. Skinner, Dr. Skinner, sorry. So he wanted us to go this far. He wanted us to see the best possible outcomes for ourselves, as well as for our learners. We've talked about this quite a bit too, but I want to bring it back to, this is always a practice. And that's part of radical behaviorism, is that you have to practice this with yourself. Otherwise, this isn't going to mean anything to your learners. This is not ABA in general. Behavior change in general should not be a do as I say, not as I do type of application. And yet I see that happen all the time. So let's do a little service to one of the founding fathers of our field. Let's go radical and go as far as possible so that we can find that underlying motivation, which was really what I believe he would have done had he worked with human beings instead of pigeons, but that's not here or there. I do believe he would have found the underlying motivation, because that's what he was saying to us back in the day. It was a calling then, and now here we are, 80 years later, still not listening. Let's do it. Let's provide these types of environments where our learners can feel free. Let's provide this type of safe environment that's regulated and that's empowering, so that we can just provide all of this positive reinforcement as opposed to manipulating the environment under coercive practices. That's our hope with REFRAME, is to provide that kind of framework for the audience.
Thanks, Meg.
Yeah.
Okay, so assent-based. So one of the things, we kind of recently talked about when we were on site at the University of Kent, which was amazing, was what are the critical features of providing compassionate care? And one of those for us, and I think we would go as far to say should be for everybody, is assent-based practice. So honoring your learner and their commitment to engage in whatever you're asking them to engage in all day, every day, and continually evaluating to ensure that that's still there. This comes out of the work of, I believe it's Dr. Michael Fabrizio, who up until recently was certainly the founder and was the owner of the Organization of Research and Learning out of Seattle. He's now moved on to some work as a compliance officer, which, if you know Michael, is like literally the perfect job for him. And he coined the term "vote with your feet." So when we allow people to, and we should, right? People shouldn't be prisoners in their own life, right? Certainly not prisoners in their own therapy. And when all of us as humans have the ability to openly decide whether we want to engage with somebody or something, it builds trust in a relationship in a really bi-directional way. Yeah, so that's certainly a super important element. Mari, we're back over to you for our M.
Yes. So M is for meaningful. And basically, meaningful is how the learner's values matter. And I want to tag on to what Meg was explaining in ACT about values and how that doesn't always mean it's something deliverable. And I took a training with Dr. Moran many years ago on ACT, and he was a psychologist that was implementing ACT for pain management, for patients in hospitals for pain management. And he gave the most beautiful example, because sometimes people get really confused with like, okay, what's a value versus what's a deliverable? And so the example he gave was, I had a parent that kept coming in and saying, I want my child to be able to sit at the table and eat dinner with us. And the parent was like, that is my value. Those are my values. And Dr. Moran was like, no, that is an actionable item. That is the deliverable. Go a little bit broader and deeper. What is the value? And so the parent went back and came back later and said, I want my child to play games with us as a family when we're playing games together. And again, Dr. Moran said, not a value. He said, I'm going to help you out. The value for you is spending quality time with your child. Those actionable items, those deliverables may not be meaningful to your child, which is where the flexibility as the parent or the practitioner or the educator comes in. Your values are that quality time, right? Or that connection. But what the deliverables are is also equally up to the child or the learner. If it's not something that's meaningful to them, we risk stepping out of that values mindset of quality time to shifting to, you're going to do this with me, and becoming very compliance driven as opposed to values driven. So that's kind of a key, I guess, separation or delineation of what is a value versus what is like that tangible or deliverable. And then, oh, my recipe card. This is something that I created for my team many years ago when I realized, like, oh my gosh, like what you're learning in your coursework, no one really showed you how to put these pieces all together, right? To create an intervention, to create a skill goal. And the first step is, okay, you've got to identify, again, meaningful to the learner, what is that desired and necessary skill? It's a balance. We know, hopefully, based on developmental appropriateness or expectedness, neuroscience, based on all of these external, disciplines that we share with you in the book, we know what is a necessary skill, and also a balance of what does the learner desire, right? The value may not be the specific way or activity in which the skill is presented, right? That comes into play with the learner's preferences. And evidence-based practices, right? It's three-pronged. One of the pieces that is most often overlooked is the social validity for the learner, right? Is it meaningful to them? That is social validity. And the next piece is, what's the vehicle through which we're going to teach the skill? That's the evidence-based practice. Many people don't know about the Autism Clearinghouse website that has that list of evidence-based practices. And essentially, it's just the vehicle through which you deliver the instructional protocol. Does the learner learn best with discrete trial? Most of mine don't. Does the learner learn best with peer-mediated intervention? Do they learn best through video modeling? Do they learn best through social narratives? That's the vehicle that you have to select through which to teach the skill. And then what makes an intervention behavior analytic in nature, and I'm not going to get on the soapbox today because we're out of time. There's really no such thing as ABA therapy, and it's in the Cooper book, but we can talk about that another time. What makes an intervention or a educational lesson behavior analytic in nature is that it meets the qualifications under our 7 dimensions. That's what makes something a therapeutic intervention or lesson guided by the principles of ABA. Boom, done. Is that mine too?
Let me deliver the last keyword in case people need to go, and we can extend the session a bit longer if you guys need just a bit more time to finish. We don't need to rush towards the end. That's fine. So our last keyword is recipe. Our last keyword for the CU is recipe. If you guys need, some of you, if you need to go, I will post the link to the form again. Remember to let that sit in your browser, because when I end the session, you're not going to have access to the chat. So this is the CEU form, and this is the feedback form. If you want to give us some feedback, don't email me about your CEU, please. I've got up to 45 days for BACB guidelines, blah, blah, blah. So just bear with me. I always do them. Do not worry if it takes a bit longer. I'll sort it out. And as I said at the beginning, do also check out the Tizard Learning Disability Review. No, I didn't say it in the vocally, I said it in the chat. This is our peer-reviewed journal, and I'm the editor of the journal, and I'm very keen to help practitioners get a publication to show the world kind of some of the good practice that they do. So if you have any good ABA or PBS work that you want to share with the world, we are very supportive of practitioners, and we help them through the publication journey. So keep that in mind. Or if you have any, obviously, I wouldn't say no to a big, nice randomized controlled trial, for example. But anyway, so that's it. You've got the CUs, you've got the links, you've got the forms. Back to our main session. Thank you for your patience, folks.
Thank you. This is actually our last slide. So we spent a lot of time in the book bringing all of these pieces together so that it's meaningful education, right? And ensuring that what you're teaching is taught in the way that the learner learns and not in the way that we're instructing. So really how to individualize your interventions, your assessments, your goals, your measurement tools, all of that to put a nice person-centered plan together. There's a few chapters where we kind of go through all of these different pieces, how you assess a learner's repertoire, what skills make up the skills that you're trying to teach, what are those developmental milestones, and we kind of take you through the questions for you to ask yourselves, similarly to how we've done in our practice, to be able to really optimize those outcomes. So all of that being said, thanks so much for hanging out with us. Are there any questions?
There are a few, and I'll read them out. Someone has asked me to repeat the last keyword. It's recipe. It was in one of the slides Mari was discussing towards the end. Recipe. Now, when is the book out is one question, and I think I'm confident to answer and say it's already out, right?
It is already available for pre-sale. So pre-sale is up. On the next slide, we have a QR code that takes you right to our publisher's website. And then hard copies become available next week on Wednesday for full sale. And at that time, it will also be going up on Amazon for ease of international shipping too. And then coming up will be an ebook. And then ultimately our goal is also to have an audiobook so that it's fully accessible for anyone's needs.
Okay, now, next question. By the way, where's the QR code? Yeah, there's the QR code. So folks, if you scan this, it will take you to the book. And there's also a website, etc., etc. Now, I am a supervisor in an ABA school, and we're trying to make our ethos more person-centered. Our less experienced tutors are struggling with not blindly following the behavior plans and being able to adapt naturally to the pupils' needs. I think this book will be very helpful in giving them confidence to do this great work. Oh, that's such lovely feedback. Look at that.
Thank you.
Oh,
We hope so too. That's one of our main focuses, because those are our 3 soapboxes.
Yep.
I've got a question that applies to me. I noticed that this has been recorded. You can access all our behavioral talks. Well, I mean, I haven't recorded all of them that I've done across like the 5 years I've been running this now, but you can find our recent ones from the past couple of years on our YouTube channel. So if you go on YouTube and you type in the search bar Tizard Center, it should bring you to our main page. And there, if you go where the playlists are, you can find one playlist that says Tizard Behavioral Talks and Journal Club. That's what we used to call it in the past. If you click on that, you will find many, many talks by knowledgeable colleagues. So they will be available to you soon. Give me just a couple of weeks to get our marketing team to do it. Roughly, that's how long they need. And it should be up for you. Great talk. Thank you. Thank you. Looking forward to reading Reframe ABA. The name of the book is Reframe ABA. Someone is asking. Very cool. Love the audiobook. Congrats, fabulous work, excellent work. Reframe, thank you. Any other questions, folks, in the chat? Fire off your questions. Thanks so much. Great talk. Can I ask something, guys? In the book, I'm thinking from the perspective of someone who teaches at the university, like, right? So we sometimes have students who say to me, Thanos, I don't have a lot of clinical experience, and sometimes in the assignments you expect me, for example, to design an intervention plan, but I'm not very fluent in this. So would people be able to, in a way, use the book as a kind of a template to help them kind of, in a way, visualize some of the processes that we tend to teach in the university and talk about? I see nodding heads. Okay, can you talk a bit about that?
For sure.
So really the intent behind the book was to bridge that gap that you're discussing right now. Because what we found was that without practicing before we got our degrees, we would have no idea how to apply this science in real life. And so we wanted to take all of the struggle out that we went through. So that's exactly what we did, was try to provide that type of framework so that it's not necessarily a template, but a buildable piece of work that you can piece together to then figure out like, that's where that comes into play, and this is how I do it.
Right. I think that's going to be very, very useful. Folks, you can also use that then for staff training. Goes back to some of the questions we had about people in schools not being able to, in a way, adapt their work and kind of following the BSPs to the dot. Thank you. Excellent session. Looking forward to the book being available on Amazon. Thank you very much. Great talk. Okay, it looks like people are excited about the prospect. I'll be applying your book to my work back in the US. Great. We've got some US folks here as well. So, okay. Dr. Cerda, Jen Farris, Meg Solomon, thank you all very, very, very much for talking to us about your book. We hope to have you back in the future to tell us how things are going and to share more good practice with us. And thank you all for joining us today. I will be advertising our next session soon, and that is going to be quite an interesting one if you want to learn more about cultural behavior science. Oh, look, there are other nice stuff that we do for you. All right. Thanks, everybody. Take care, and I will see you all around. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank